Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this very first webinar of ENSULIB, IFLA's Environment, Sustainability, and Libraries section. The title of the webinar today is The Power of Data to Advance the SDGs, the role of publishers to support the SDGs, and examples from Elsevier. My name is Priscilla Poon. I'm the Information Coordinator of the ENSULIB section. Please feel free to type your name and country into the chat. We are interested in knowing where you are. Before we begin, let me start with some notes on privacy and administration. This event is being recorded, including chat. The video will be posted on YouTube, and the link will be posted on ENSULIB's webpage, as well as on social media. The chat and the Q&A protocol will not be recorded nor published. Microphones have been muted for this event. If you have any questions or comments, please type into the chat or Q&A box. If you have questions regarding privacy, please send an email to professionalsupport@ifla.org. And now we are pleased to invite Dr. Petra Hawk, the Secretary of the ENSULIB section, to deliver an opening speech for the webinar. Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Priscilla. Hello, everybody, from my home city, Berlin in Germany. I greet you in the name of ENSULIB, the IFLA's Environment, Sustainability and Libraries section. We are very happy to see that there are so many colleagues from around the world interested in ENSULIB's very first webinar. As you might know, ENSULIB started its career long ago as a very small special interest group, focusing on environmental sustainability and libraries. After many years of hard work and with a growing interest in sustainability issues worldwide, ENSULIB received the status of an IFLA section in the beginning of 2021, thanks to more than 70 institutional IFLA members worldwide who helped us to make the section status possible. Now we are able to work with a very smart standing committee of 20 members from all over the world, chaired by Resea from Finland. The section started its work in August 2021 and could already present an impressive range of activities, like the very first newsletter published in December 2021. Furthermore, the announcement of the 7th IFLA Green Library Award 2022, together with newly published evaluation criteria, and last but not least, with the new official definition, what is a green library? If you would like to learn more about ENSULIB, please visit our newly launched website. I wish to thank especially Priscilla Poon from Macau, ENSULIB's information coordinator, the initiator of this very first ENSULIB webinar, and also Vivian Bird from Los Angeles, joining us today as facilitator of the webinar. I also thank Anders Carlsson, based in Tokyo, Japan, who accepted our invitation to present his paper on the power of data to advance the SDGs without hesitation. And now I'm handing over back to Priscilla. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. At this time, it is our great honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Anders Carlsson from Elsevier. Dr. Carlsson is currently the Vice President, Global Strategic Networks of Elsevier. In this role, he is actively engaged in Elsevier's efforts around sustainability. He is furthermore the Japan Chapter Chair of the Science, Technology, and Medical Publisher Association, and a member of the Asia Chapter Steering Committee of the International Network for government science advice. Please find more information about Dr. Carson's impressive career on our website. And now, Dr. Carson, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and I'm really honored to be here, and especially it's very nice to see the work you're doing, because it makes a difference. So let me share the screen, and okay, and I share my screen and I go to my slideshow and I ask my first question: do you see my slides? I think yes. You see my slides, right? Okay, so I have spent a great part of my life in academia, and I think a great part of that was actually spent in the library, finding out about the world, and also finding time to study in peace. So I'm really honored to be here. So I will give a bit of overview of the activities we have been doing together with the research community on how you can measure research and research publications, how they are supporting various SDGs. And having that measurements, you can draw some insights, and such insight can then help to support policy. So that's the overall idea. So let's see. I think all of us here are feeling there is a strong concern that the way we're interacting with our surroundings is increasingly really threatening even the very existence of life as we over centuries has learned to know it. I mean, we're in the middle of a global health crisis with COVID. The human-induced changes to climate have caused the temperatures to increase. And I think for the last 6 years, every year has seen new records broken in terms of temperatures. And equally concerned is that the wasteful practices we have in how we use land, how we pollute, and on top of that, the climate change is leading to what is now called the sixth mass extinction of species. And this is potentially as alarming as the climate change. So I'm originally from Sweden, although I live in Japan. So to quote from my Swedish fellow citizen, Greta Thunberg, who said, listen to the science. So I believe we need a stronger dialogue across sectors in society. So we are to steer what we do as our activities on Earth into a better path. So I will touch upon 3 things here. So I give first a brief intro to an overview of the SDGs, then the role of libraries and publishers to some extent. Then I go into the main piece, how can we measure the research on the SDGs? And to make it even more tangible, I give 3 insights from analytics we have been doing from elsewhere on using that type of measurements. And these are all publicly available. And towards the end, I actually have a slide, which you can have later, with links to these reports. So I show 3 examples. One, I look on what's the participation of the what you call the global South in research around the SDGs. Then I go in to look at what are the gender aspects touched upon in research on the SDGs. And finally, I will go in, as you know, we had the COP26, Conference of Parties 26, just ended in Glasgow last year. And before that, we produced a report which looked at the research done on clean energy towards net zero emissions. And what are some of the findings you can see from that? And I think the idea with this is to raise some questions and thoughts on how could this be useful for the research community, and how can it be useful for you as members of IFLA in terms of your discussions with the community of researchers, the public, policymakers, or those you're discussing with. So that's the overall idea, and I very much encourage questions. So please type them in the chat and to follow that. So, okay, so let me start with the first one. Just very briefly info on the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and libraries and publisher roles. And I'm very humble in that many of you probably know more than me of this, but just to get to warm up a bit. So the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they were adopted in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There are basically 17 SDG goals, which have 169 targets and then 231 indicators to measure progress. So since I am from Sweden and Stockholm originally, what you see here is a different way to cut the cake, so to speak. And this is actually called the SDG wedding cake model. And it was proposed by the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University. So what it essentially shows is that we have 4 SDGs, number 6, 13, 14, and 15, which relates to the biosphere, basically the nature around us, and which is really the foundation for life. Then there are 8 SDGs relating to our society, such as around no poverty, education, peace, and gender equality. And then there are 4 which relates more to the economic activities, such as around decent work, sustainable innovation, reducing inequality, and a sustainable. And then on top of this, SDG 17 on partnership, which kind of, if it's supposed to be called a wedding cake, I think it's then partnerships is suitable to have on top, right? And you have there the link on how these are to that definition. So just to make it even a bit more concrete, what's behind each of these goals? So I took SDG 4, quality education, and I then just listed the targets that are there, such as free primary and secondary education, eliminate all discrimination in education, education for sustainable development. So SDG 4 has 10 indicators, 10 targets, and then there are underlying indicators. And this gives it a bit more tangible what is actually under each of these SDGs. And I gave the example of SDG 4. So actually, we're now 6 in the 6th year since the launch in 2015. And we're actually not making the progress needed to achieve if we speak of a 2030 deadline. So at the start of 2020, we were not on track to meet any of these goals. For example, the current rate of progress says that it would take 257 years to close the economic gender pay gap. And in 2019, there was a UN emission report which said that the world is actually on the path towards a 3-degree increase in global temperatures. And this will be very devastating. And the impact of COVID has created further delays, and in some cases reversed progress in key areas such as poverty and education. So let's see if this works. So again, I'm very almost apologizing to everyone who is here on the because you are part of the community, IFLA community. So you may be familiar, I'm sure you are very much familiar to the key role that libraries and library community play. And I took the statement, it should said IFLA, I apologize, a statement from 2013 on libraries and development in terms of providing opportunity for all, empowering people for own self-development, providing access to a world of knowledge, and librarians having a key role to provide expert guidance. And the libraries, they're part of a multi-stakeholder society. And in 2013 was stated then that, well, for us, of course, libraries should be recognized within the development policy frameworks. And also there is a link there to a publication by IFLA, Access and Opportunity for All. So I turn to the role of publishers and publishing industry. From the International Publishing Association, one thing that has been launched is the so-called SDG Publisher Compact. And if you haven't seen that, I think it could be quite interesting. And some of my colleagues in Elsevier actually been on our side quite very active in terms of this. So I'm a bit internally proud to be working with them. And to date, this was launched at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2020. It has 10 concrete actions that publisher associations commit to and also work towards for the progress of the SDGs. And at this stage, I think there are more than 150 signatories across the global publishing industry. So I think this is quite a good initiative overall. I'm trying to avoid a bit too much, not do any kind of Elsevier promotion per se. Internally, we have thought quite a lot what as a science, technology, and medical publisher and working in information analytics, what are the things we probably can do most? So we have identified, for instance, 4 of the SDGs, such as SDG 3, SDG 5, 10, and 13. And for 5, we have started an internal, with external experts, Inclusion and Diversity Board. We have started a Climate Advisory Board, and we're working very closely with many of the initiatives, such as Research for Life, and we have the Elsevier Foundation as well. I mention a bit more later, and that comes to how you measure research on the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings. Our data on the research components, research publication component, stands for around 30% of that very ranking. So that is a bit on industry initiative and somewhat on what we are doing, and feel free to ask about both. So let me then kind of shift to the main piece. How can you measure what is the research done towards the SDGs? Interesting. So first of all, why do you want to do that measurement? Well, in some sense, what you measure, you're aware of, and hopefully can change. That is probably why we on our iPhone have a kind of health activity app to track what we're doing, to walk more steps, etc., etc. So why do we want to measure kind of research? Because measurements, assessments, evaluation across research, it strengthens, enhances our ability to influence areas of investments and outcome. It can inform on national competitiveness or collaborations, where we are around environmental protections, social justice, equity, and inclusion. So from the perspective of companies of the side, what can we measure? The picture you see to the right, by the way, this is from one of the reports we released in 2020, where we looked into a lot of for each SDG, we looked into various data, and I show some of that later on. So we can measure basically research output, publications across a lot of publishers, conferences, books, etc., and the academic impact. We can measure to see what are the topics, investigated. Types of collaboration, be it international, be it across sectors, be it across topics, the role, level of interdisciplinarity, for instance. We can measure social media. Some of you here may have heard of what you call alt metrics, for instance, alternative metrics. We also have access to funding information. And through collaborations to our sister company, we can measure proxies towards innovation, such as patenting activities. And having all of these gives you a picture of what goes on, and that can then help for steering investments. I hope it makes a bit that piece a bit clear. So just a few things. So we have published over the years quite a few of what we call pro bono reports. These are large public reports which relate to the SDGs. I've actually myself been part of most of these, actually. So I don't mind mentioning them in that sense. So in 2015, we did our first report around the SDGs, where we basically mapped across 6 broad themes on SDGs. We have then looked at things such as disaster science, what's the research done? We have done extensive work on gender in science, where we can basically gender tag publications and then look at shares of men and women researchers, citation impact, collaborations, across many areas, and then that can be used to inform, go back to policy. We looked at artificial intelligence. We produced our second SDG report in 2020. Our third, I think, report around gender in 2020. And just before the COP26 in October 28, we released a report called Pathways to Net Zero: Impact of Clean Energy Research. And I will give a bit more flavor of these, some of the things there, because that gives a bit more tangible, I hope tangible, to see how this can be used. So just a recipe, how do you match public SDGs? Well, first since we look at the research, we start from a large bibliometric database, and no surprise, since this is Elsevier, we would start from the database Scopus. We would have then from more than 7,000 publishers, not only Elsevier, covering journal publications, conferences, books, etc. So it's a broad bibliometric database. So next, we use in-house expertise as well as external expertise to define via keywords, basically, via keyword search, what is research relating to a certain SDG. And then we will go into each of the targets and each of the indicator to see what keywords would tell if a publication would match to one or more than one SDG. And in that case, with that, you can take the big database and then kind of map out this part here, these maps to certain SDGs. We have to be very humble to say that there are different SDGs cuts or queries used in the literature. So what we have is not the final answer, and we are constantly working to improve things. So we have partnered with University Network, Aurora University, University of Auckland, University of Southern Denmark, in order to improve this work on this SDG mapping. We have also recently also used machine learning. Basically, we take a set of SDG papers that we know belong to a certain SDG. We train an AI to tell to find other ones which are also belongs to that. And for those who are bibliometrically saving, that will allow us to increase precision in telling that if we have a publication belonging to an SDG, whether that really is relevant to that SDG, it will increase what you call recall, to say that we have really captured all the relevant publications to the SDGs. So we have used all of this. And then we have continued to learn with the community. I think it was in 2019 or 20, the THC Impact Ranking 2020 was released. And there we used these search queries for the first time. We have further improved them again in 2021, and they are used now for the Times Higher Education Impact Ranking. We also have them in our tools, and there is even a free layer for someone who is interested. But I like to stress that this is still a learning curve, so there may be further improvements around this, but it's quite complex. Some of search queries are actually right now 100 pages long, but all of them, if you go to that link, we are about fully transparent, so the science community can know exactly how we are defining it. And that is actually quite important. So I hope that helped a bit. This slide is a bit busy. I just apologize for that. It basically tells how that journey. We started in 2015 with this global landscape report. Actually, it was launched in April 2019, Times Higher Education Impact Ranking, and we then further improved these queries to where we are right now. And again, you can go to that web link to see where we are right now. So it's with some confidence that we understand what is mapped to certain SDGs, but it is quite a lot of a dialogue with the community. Okay, that was the overview. So this is how it's done. So show me some practical examples. Okay, I go on to discuss practical examples. So I will look at three things. So what does this type of research and analysis tell about participation in the research from the Global South? One, I look a bit further onto the gender aspects of the research, and then the research towards net zero emissions. So three concrete examples, and the hope is that you can see from that how this practically can be used. So first of all, from the report we released in 2020, we actually could see, for instance, that the three largest countries by academic output is US, China, and the UK. But then what's is a bit concerning, of course, is if we look in terms of what is published by the highest income country, high income countries, and by the lowest income countries. And then here we're using the definition, I think, from the World Bank. You can actually see that 78% comes from the high income countries. And actually, it's only in SDG 1 that the highest contributions from the lowest income countries was 2.1%. In all other SDGs, it was lower. And of course, this is a concern because of the challenges seen around many of these SDGs are actually affecting the lower income countries the most. And then in terms of the learning's capacity building, are the right things being studied? So this is something that when seeing these numbers, you become a bit, I should say, it makes you think. So just to take one example, which I think is close to all of our parts here, SDG 4, research towards quality education. So this is the map it shows the number of publications. In green, more than 2,000 publications. In the dark red, quarter red, fewer than 100. 70.9% publications are from high-income locations, and only 0.5% from the lowest income. I really don't have any answer to what this implies. I do think it makes you reflect into questions around funding, for instance. But these are some examples of what this type of data around the SDG research can tell, as a first example. Okay, so far? Is it okay? I switched gear to a second. Gender aspects in SDG research. So given that there is strong evidence that things like education, health, economic security, and also climate change have different effects and affects men and women different, then we ask the question, to what extent does research on the SDGs take into effect sex and gender aspects? So what we did was to take our SDG queries on one hand, and then create a keyword query that related to sex and gender aspects in science. And then you combine those with an and. So then we can find the research on SDGs that relates to that takes into account sex and gender aspects. And there is a publication, I think there is also a preprint there, where the exact methodology of this is done. First, as a quick check, if we take SDG 5, gender equality, and we can see that 95% of publications takes sex and gender aspects into account. So this is quite an okay litmus test that the methodology seems to be okay. But then you can see what comes a concern. Look at all the other SDGs. Look at all the other SDGs. SDG 7, 1% looks into sex aspects. So when we looked at this further, so we could take, for instance, SDG 3, good health and well-being. So what you see here is a word cloud where the color shows the share of a sex and or gender research score of publications, as well as various keywords. So what we could see for SDG 3, you have 61% of SDG 3 publications took that aspects into account, which is again, yes, it's okay perhaps. So let me give another example. Climate change. Only 4% of research publications. And by publications, there are publications in journals, in conference, in books, etc. All types of publications, which are in Scopus. Only 4% of publications on SDGs in climate change took sex and gender into account. You may think it's kind of natural if you look at the pure physical sciences that these aspects may not be taken into account if you think of climate, the physics of climate modeling. But if you reflect upon it, women, and if you take it much broader, if you take, let's say, broader, if you take minorities, are significantly more impacted by climate change issues, actually more so than men. This is shown by research. So only 4% of the research in SDG 13 could be a bit of a warning clock. It's also so that research also shows that women will play a critical role in the response to climate change, notably in many cases due to local knowledge and leadership around, for instance, things like sustainable resource management, leading sustainable practices in companies, community levels, etc. So again, I think this is one point where, okay, this is what the research says. Yeah, this should be a concern. Is there something we can do around that? Are there interventions we can do? So this was my second example. So let me take my third. So this is something brand new. It looks into the landscape of clean energy research. And this was, of course, done in of the COP20 Conference of Parties on Climate Change. This report on October 28th. It's a collaboration, most of these reports have both external and internal expertise, both advisors as well as expert interviews. So why did we look at clean energy research? It's interesting. This is from Our World in Data, a database. And it's CCBY by, I can use this in my presentation. So if you look into which industry sector contributes the most to greenhouse gas emission, that is it's actually how we produce and use energy. So just from these data, it shows that energy production and later use by sectors contributes to more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is data from 2016, by the way. So making energy production more cleaner, as well as using energy more efficient, is of top priority. So that is why we looked into this. I hope it makes sense. So in this report, how did we basically define what is relevant research towards what you call net zero? Net zero means net zero carbon emission into the atmosphere, basically. So then we used basically our SDG definition of affordable and clean energy, SDG 7. Plus we put an energy filter on SDG 13 on climate action to capture those publications within SDG 13 which are relevant around topic of energy. And we came to this agreement together with external experts. And just if you're interested, if you take your mobile phone and click with a QR code, you can actually download the report directly there. So this is very recent work. Okay, let me show some results. So first of all, in energy research, what does it mean? So these are from the research publications. So we picked out the top 50 keywords from research publications of this set of publications. What are the top keywords? So you can actually see things like solar energy, lithium-ion battery, wind turbines, biodiesel, which can be a clean energy source. You also see maybe a bit, you may wonder, as Internet of Things or IoT. So this is basically to control devices for energy management. The same thing is why you see wireless networks, for instance. So that is how we can control to make more efficient use of energy. So these are the key phrases that come out around the clean energy research. So I just have one more picture to show before I come to conclusion. So what does the world look like in terms of who is doing what? So what is very good is that net zero energy research is really growing, which, and here we have mainland China in the clear lead. So net zero energy publications overall, they grew from being 1% of global publications in 2001 to now 5% in 2020. And the world leader in terms of publications is actually, some may think, the US. No, it's mainland China, accounted for 24% of all the net zero energy publications, 24%. The US was second with 17.2%. India was third, 6.4%. Germany fourth with 5.9%, and Japan fifth. In our report, we will look into many other things, such as which areas are studied, the degree of interdisciplinarity, how publications relates to policy. We're all looking into patenting landscape. There, actually, China's patent landscape has grown exponentially over the last years. So it's really, in terms of publications and patenting activities, now publishing the most and patenting the most. This was one of key findings in the report. So I hope these three examples have shown you to some extent what can be done with this type of analysis. So with that, I want to kind of come up with a summary and a question. So it seems very obvious that the library and publishing community, we have a key role as professionals of trusted information and as facilitators of knowledge. We have a key role to play to support the advancement of the SDGs. And I hope to have given some examples. I hope I did it fast, by the way, to show what are the type of insights we can draw from mapping research publication landscape, the global research publication landscape around this topic. What are the type of insights that can be drawn? So I am open to questions or comments with an open question, the community that everyone is here. So how can the work we do, and not just Elsevier, but the community where I am one of the representatives, how can we support the work you are doing? So with that, I will stop sharing and hand over back to Petra, Priscilla, and Viviane.
Thank you, Dr. Carson, for your interesting and inspiring presentation. You leave a question to us. How can your work as a publisher support our work in library fields? So let us share our comments in the Q&A session. Okay, so let me share the slide again. Do you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the Q&A session, and our facilitators today are Vivian Bird from Los Angeles Public Library, and myself, Priscilla Poon, from University of Macau Library. So Vivian, are you ready?
Yes.
Let's start with the questions from the floor.
Sure.
Yes, I saw several questions already there.
Yes. So I'm gonna pull one from the Q&A box by Arun. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, or Arun. What are the major challenges in the action in 6 years apart from COVID?
Well, it's clear. I mean, there are two challenges, major challenges we're seeing, and that is to increase the speed of which we adopt to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, because otherwise the temperatures will basically run amok. The second one is really to, we have to stop the way we are, the biodiversity is extremely challenging. The called the COP15 around biodiversity will have they have 2 sessions, and the next one will be in May. This is another thing, because this affects everything around food and so forth. I mean, industry side has to play a big role. Our industry should do what we can do, and you see from so elsewhere, for instance, and others, we have signed what is called the climate pledge to be net zero by 2040, 10 years earlier than the 2050. But that's just one initiative. Society will probably need to change things like food behavior, way where the waste issue. So key challenge is for everyone to leave the comfort zone for the change we have to do. It's hard. I have a good example myself. I don't know if there are questions, but everyone has to somehow try to affect our organization to act.
I'm gonna go to the next question, also posed by Arun or Arun. What is the contribution of social sciences in the research related to SDGs?
Yes, we have that in the original report, I know. We also looked into this in the Zero report. And one of the conclusions there was that we found that it was too little. Because the reason is that clean energy is it's really not just about new or fancy technologies, but a lot of it is to get out the technologies we already have out in society. And for that, more understanding on what are the mechanisms to have that more effectively out, which would need social sciences. So that was one of the concerns we saw. I cannot directly give you the number, but we can potentially try to figure this out and put out when there's the event summary. But it's a very good question, and it's something that is important.
Okay, I'm gonna switch the gear a little bit and go to Tatiana. She has a question. I wonder if this report is published, and could we read the presented data on SDG research anywhere, like bibliometrics?
Yes, all the reports I shown are basically online. Some of the data I showed, you will get these slide deck, of course. Some of the data I showed would be is part of the tool we have, which is Lival anyway. Some of that is in a public layer where you can find some of these data. I cannot swear, I cannot tell that all of the data will be in the public domain because I did some specific cuts, but 95% of what I showed here today is basically in the reports.
That's awesome. That's great to know. Now I'm going to switch back to our Q&A box. So Ron or Arun again asked another question. Is there any data or research related to research of LGBTQ plus and SDGs?
That's a very good, it's something I will bring back to our team, because some of my colleagues have been leading the LGBT plus initiatives in the International Publisher Association. So it's certainly one of the issues we are very much engaged in, both in our own company as well as the industry. So that is something I will bring back, also to see how we can do that methodology. But that's a very good comment. Thank you.
Great. Next one, we have an anonymous attendee. What instrument did you use in generating the data? Word cloud, etc.
So these were generated based on the tool which is called Saival, and you can actually, you can get the feeling in this free. We have a free layer on all the SDGs in this tool, which you can find probably if you just Google Elsevier Saival SDG, then you can see that free layer. And then internally, how that exactly is generated, I would embarrass myself in front of all the technologists in our company if I gave a try to give an answer. But we have a methodology to do it.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. And next question is, we are nearing 2030 already. What do you think is the next after the 2030 SDG agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a start. And already, I mean, many of the goals are, some of targets are set towards 2050. So I would basically see that this is just a start. There needs to be the full continuation on the resource uses. It's like, I think it was Ban Ki-moon who said that there is no planet B.
Yes.
So I mean, the 2030 is just a start.
All right, and now moving on to the next question. And just a note to everyone, if you have any question, please feel free to type in the chat or use the Q&A box. The next question comes from Uta. Thank you very much for your fascinating talk and introducing us to this interesting analysis tool. My question would be regarding the sustainability of digital data itself. Since it uses much resources, especially energy and hardware, what thoughts and strategies has Elsevier had as a company in this area so far to make the analysis and data production itself net zero?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good comment. We actually have inside the company initiatives both towards, you usually talk about three things: your own emissions, the emissions of the what you call type 2, the indirect emissions, as well as the emissions on those all you work with, the subcontractors, etc. And we're actually already fulfilling the scope 1 emissions. So we are actually sourcing all our electricity productions from renewable energy sources. And what we're not, in some cases, directly cannot do, we compensate for that. We also did the analysis in finding out that 60% of our emissions stemmed from travel. So this is something we are working actively on how to reduce this. And we measure that as a baseline of 2000, not 2020. So it's something we're very seriously looking at. And we have published, we put that out when we made this climate action pledge. We put that out on our website on how we are working around this.
Thank you. We're down to our last question. The question is there any measure related to predatory journal, its effect on research?
How to say it? Overall, science is a self-healing system. Research is a self-healing system, and we all find out what are the effects around these, the predatory journals, or if you want to call it fake science or similar. And it is a concern, definitely, and it's really the most hurting researchers who they publish in a journal that all of a sudden publishes, and that it hurts the researchers. So from the industry, there has been one initiative called Check Submit, which is a kind of checklist. So to gear you towards journals which are not predatory in this way. So measure directly. We are aware of this phenomenon, of course, and we basically, as an industry, trying to work ourselves on good practices. But I would point to this Think, Check, Submit. If you either I put in that, or because I think that's one good Clara Schindler, yes.
All right, great. So we have someone here. So Clara is asking a question. The Armitage, etc. study from 2020 show very little overlap between their query approach under UND or under the Elsevier approach. Would you still say the method is robust and has that improved since the query have been refined last year?
I'm vaguely aware of this study by Armitage. I've not seen the details and cannot recall them as such directly. No, we had major improvements going from the 2020 to the 2021 queries. And notably, this was done when the Canadian company Trix joined Elsevier. So they worked on this improvement. And I think the machine learning piece have basically added to this precisionary recall. I would have to defer the detailed answer to that, to go back to our bibliometrics team to check, potentially check back to you, because I'm very honest in saying that I don't know myself. I do think, from what I've seen, the publications that come out when I do my amateurish look at this, it looks good, but again, we're very humble to say that these are not the only way to make the cut. Does it help, Clara?
Clara, you can let us know if the if our speaker answered your question by putting that in the chat. Or if I just
avoided it.
She said, yes, thank you.
But I will check it up.
Awesome. All right, that is all the questions we have, and it looks like we're right on the dot. So I'm going to hand this back to Priscilla.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Anders. Thank you all for joining the webinar today. It's been a pleasure to host this event, and we wish you all a remarkable year ahead. Hope to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.